On a Thanksgiving night, when homes across America glowed with family warmth, Samuel Grant, a powerful CEO, found himself alone, as always. His world was a fortress of solitude, built on ambition and isolation. He thought he had everything, but he had nothing. Yet just moments away, a quiet knock at his office door was about to unlock a truth he'd long forgotten: that the deepest connections often arrive in the most unexpected ways. What if one small act of kindness could shatter a lifetime of loneliness? Before we begin, if this kind of story speaks to your heart, feel free to share where you're watching from. It's always beautiful to see how far stories like this can travel. Thanksgiving evening in Manhattan was quiet from above. The cityscape softened under a mist of cold fog and twinkling amber lights. Inside the towering Grant Industries building, the top floor remained lit while the rest of the skyline dimmed for the holiday. Samuel Grant sat alone at the head of a long mahogany table in his office, a room lined with glass, silence, and success. Before him sat a plated meal catered by one of the city's finest restaurants. Roast turkey, glazed carrots, cranberry sauce meticulously placed like art. It was untouched. Steam had long faded, and so had any real appetite. Samuel stared past the food, past the spotless window, into the indifferent city below, feeling a familiar hollowness settle in his chest. He wasn't expecting anyone. He never did on holidays. The soft chime of the security intercom broke the quiet. "Mr. Grant?" came the voice of Thomas, the lobby security guard. "Sorry to disturb you, sir, but there's a little girl here asking to come up. Says it's urgent. She brought pie?" Samuel blinked, caught somewhere between irritation and confusion. "What?" "She said it's for Thanksgiving, and that she's alone." There was a pause. Samuel's tone sharpened. "Thomas, do I look like someone who hands out candy on Halloween? Send her away. Call her guardian." "That's the thing, sir. She says she doesn't have any." Samuel stood abruptly, running a hand through his dark brown hair. This had to be a mistake, or a stunt. The world outside might be chaotic, but this floor, his world, was sacred, protected, untouched by mess, emotion, or unexpected visits from children holding dessert. Minutes later, the elevator chimed. The glass doors opened, and there she was. A little girl, no more than 7, standing in the threshold of the most powerful office in the building. She wore a faded red velvet dress, probably once meant for something special, but now slightly wrinkled and too thin for the weather. Her blonde curls were pulled back with a clip shaped like a pumpkin, and in her hands she cradled a small foil-covered box. A ribbon dangled loosely from it. Scrawled across the top in orange crayon were the words, "If you're lonely like me, maybe we could eat together." Samuel's breath caught. Before he could speak, the girl stepped forward with quiet determination. "I'm sorry to bother you on a holiday," she said clearly, her voice soft but certain. "My name is Maggie Dawson. I don't have anywhere to go tonight. I brought pumpkin pie. It's store-bought, but I picked it myself." Samuel opened his mouth, but no words came. He looked to his assistant, who stood frozen near the door, equally stunned. Then back to the girl. "You can't be up here," he finally managed, his voice colder than he intended. "This is a private building. Where are your parents?" Maggie's gaze didn't flinch. "My mom died last year. My aunt dropped me off at the shelter this morning but said not to wait for her." She looked down at the box in her hands. "I wore my nicest dress in case someone invited me." Samuel stared at her, utterly unprepared. Maggie continued, her eyes beginning to shimmer but never quite overflowing. "I just wanted someone to see me, Even just once. I don't want to eat alone again this year." It hit him like a quiet explosion, not loud, but deep. The kind that starts in the gut and ripples outward, cracking old walls in slow, aching waves. Something stirred in him, a flicker of memory, of an emotion he hadn't let surface in years. "You walked in here alone?" he asked, his voice nearly a whisper now. She nodded. "It's a tall building. I figured important people live up top. People who maybe don't like eating alone either." The words didn't make sense. Or rather, they made too much sense. Samuel took a step back and looked at the room around him. A conference table built for 20, polished floors you could see your reflection in, a fireplace that hadn't been lit in 5 years, and then back to this little girl who somehow made all of it look so ridiculous. "I'm not a charity case," she added. "I just thought maybe we could share a meal just for tonight. I can go after." Samuel sat down heavily in the leather chair behind his desk, as though her words had weight. Real weight. More than quarterly losses or merger negotiations ever did. No one had come to him like this in a long time. Not asking for money, not asking for favors, just asking not to be invisible. He looked at the box in her hands, then at her. "I didn't expect company," he said, slower now, more human. Maggie gave a tiny shrug. "Me neither." And in that silence, something unfamiliar unfolded within him. Not pity, not obligation, but something far deeper, far older. He gestured gently to the chair across from him. "Sit down, Miss Dawson." Her eyes lit up, not in joy, but in relief. The kind of relief that said she'd been holding herself together for hours, maybe days, maybe longer. She climbed onto the oversized leather chair, her feet dangling far from the floor, her hands still wrapped around the pie like it was sacred. For a moment, neither spoke. And then Samuel Grant, whose presence alone made seasoned executives sweat, did something utterly out of character. He stood, walked to the table, and quietly removed the silver dome from the untouched Thanksgiving meal. He placed it between them and then sat down on the opposite side. He reached into a drawer and took out 2 sets of silverware. "Let's eat." The corners of Maggie's mouth twitched into something halfway between a smile and disbelief. "Thank you," she whispered. Samuel didn't answer. He couldn't, because something inside him had cracked wide open, not suddenly, but like the slow thaw of ice that's been frozen for decades. And for the first time in years, the loneliness in that glass tower had company. A small girl in a red dress, and a pie that wasn't meant to be eaten alone. The next morning, Samuel Grant's office returned to its usual silence. No laughter, no footsteps that didn't belong, no stray voices interrupting the rhythm of calculated power. It was pristine, too pristine. His assistant, Helen, walked in at precisely 8 a.m. with his double espresso, placing it down beside his tablet without a word, then retreating as if rehearsed. She always did. Everyone did. Because Samuel liked it that way. A world of crisp lines, unspoken rules, and absolute control. He sat in his chair, the leather creaking slightly beneath him, gazing out at the skyline as the sun lit the glass towers. From up here, the city looked small, manageable, like something you could bend to your will. And for years, Samuel had done just that, reshaped companies, cut through boardrooms, merged and bought and sold entire lives from this exact chair. And yet, something felt off this morning. He didn't touch the espresso, didn't scroll through the morning's forecasts. Instead, his eyes drifted to the far edge of his desk where, absurdly, a crumpled ribbon now lay bright orange, smeared faintly with a child's thumbprint in what looked like dried frosting. He should have thrown it away, but he didn't. It wasn't just the ribbon, it was the echo. That voice. That tiny voice wrapped in oversized courage saying, "I just wanted someone to see me." Samuel stood abruptly and walked to the window. The office, with its cold symmetry and surgical cleanliness, reflected back at him. Even the plants weren't real. Every surface gleamed, yet nothing here breathed. And then there had been her. Maggie Dawson, 7 years old, confident, quiet, stubborn, wearing a dress that had seen better days and holding a pie like it was a passport to another world. She hadn't begged. She hadn't even flinched. She just asked, like it was the most reasonable thing in the world. And she had said something else too. A line that still lingered like smoke in the air. "I don't want to eat alone again this year." Helen re-entered, holding a notepad. "Mr. Grant, just a reminder, your 10 o'clock with the Zurich team is confirmed. Also, you have 3 charity invites on your desk. Year-end donor galas. I assume declines across the board?" Samuel turned from the window. "Clear my calendar until noon." Helen blinked. "Sir? I need time to think." She hesitated, then gave a small nod and backed out. Even she didn't dare question him. But Samuel didn't sit back down. Instead, he walked slowly toward the sideboard where Maggie's pie tin still rested. Half empty. Cold now. But he hadn't thrown it away either. Something about that moment, the way she had passed it across the table, hands trembling ever so slightly, as if afraid it might be her last act of hope, kept playing in his mind. She had sat there in silence, eating a meal meant for boardroom executives, not little girls in second-hand dresses. She hadn't made noise, hadn't asked for seconds. She just existed, with her back straight, her eyes wide, and a dignity he'd rarely seen in adults. And then, just before she left, she'd said one more thing. "My mom said, if you ever feel invisible, the bravest thing you can do is speak up, even if no one's listening." He had walked her down to the lobby himself, not his assistant, not security, him. And before the elevator closed, Maggie had looked up at him and said, "Thank you for letting me be seen, Mr. Grant, now." The memory struck sharper than before, because once, a long time ago, someone else had said something similar. His sister. Emily Grant had been only 9 when she passed away, a congenital heart defect. He remembered the hospital room, the quiet beeping, the way she held his hand with tiny fingers and whispered, "You have the biggest brain, Sam, but don't let it grow bigger than your heart." She had smiled through her oxygen mask, believing in him. And then one day, she was gone. He hadn't spoken about Emily in decades, not even in therapy, if that brief stint of corporate-mandated counseling years ago counted. He'd buried her memory beneath meetings, deals, and real estate portfolios. But Maggie's presence had stirred it back up, raw, uninvited, unstoppable. He picked up his phone, stared at the screen for a long moment, then hit the intercom. "Helen, can you contact the Midtown shelter for me?" There was a pause. "The shelter, sir?" "Yes," he said slowly, as if the words themselves were foreign. "A girl named Maggie Dawson. I want to know if she arrived safely, and if she needs anything." Helen didn't respond immediately. She was used to coordinating financial summits, not tracking down little girls with pie. "I'll find out," she said at last, her voice softer than usual. Samuel ended the call and sat back down at his desk. The silence returned, but it didn't feel right anymore. He looked around the office, immaculate, untouched, and hollow. In the glass reflection behind him, for just a second, he imagined the faint outline of a girl in a red dress standing at the doorway again. Not real, but not forgotten. And somewhere inside him, that long, frozen ache stirred. Not loudly, not all at once, but deeply. "You can have everything," Emily had once said. "Just don't lose your heart." Samuel didn't know exactly what he was feeling, but for the first time in years, he was sure of one thing. He didn't want Maggie Dawson to disappear. Not into the streets, not into the system, and not from his life. The cold bite of November air struck Samuel as soon as he stepped out of the black sedan. He stood on the cracked sidewalk in front of a small, aging church building nestled between two towering apartment blocks. The neon glow of a nearby deli flickered dimly, barely cutting through the early evening dusk. It was a world far removed from his penthouse office. No glass walls, no valet parking, no marble lobbies, just rusted railings, stained concrete, and the faint scent of damp insulation. He adjusted the collar of his wool coat and approached the front steps, each one groaning under his polished shoes like they weren't used to bearing such weight. The Midtown Community Shelter occupied the church basement. The woman at the front, a volunteer named Janet, greeted him with cautious curiosity. He'd called ahead, requesting to visit a young girl named Maggie Dawson. "Are you family?" Janet asked, eyeing his designer overcoat and leather gloves. Samuel hesitated. "Not yet," he said. "But she came to see me yesterday. I wanted to make sure she was safe." Janet tilted her head, considering him for a beat, then opened the door and led him inside. The air shifted immediately. It was warmer but stale, like old fabric and reheated soup. The fluorescent lighting hummed overhead, flickering slightly in the corners of the hallway. They passed a row of mismatched cots tucked behind thin partitions, belongings stuffed into donated backpacks and plastic crates. It wasn't a home. It wasn't even temporary comfort. It was survival, barely. "She's quiet," Janet said as they turned a corner. "Keeps to herself. Didn't even cry when she got dropped off." Samuel clenched his jaw. He knew resilience when he saw it, but in a child that small, it felt like a wound in disguise. Maggie was sitting cross-legged on a thin mattress near the back of the room, coloring silently by the dim light of a desk lamp. Her dress had been replaced with an oversized hoodie and leggings that didn't quite fit. She looked smaller here, like a paper figure set against the cluttered, dreary backdrop. When she saw him, her eyes widened, not in fear or surprise, but in something softer. Hope, maybe. "You came," she said simply. Samuel nodded. "I told you I would." He sat on the edge of a nearby cot, his frame dwarfing the space. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. "Did you eat today?" he asked, his voice softer than he'd meant it. Maggie shrugged. They had chicken noodle soup. It was mostly broth. She didn't complain. She didn't ask for more. She just accepted it. His eyes drifted to a small wooden box beside her cot, worn, chipped at the edges. She noticed and lifted the lid. Inside were folded papers, a crumpled hair tie, and a neatly folded piece of cloth, a lavender scarf fraying at the ends. "This was my mom's," she said. "She wore it every time she walked me to school. It still smells like her." Samuel felt something press against his chest. She reached into the box again and pulled out a few pieces of folded construction paper. She spread them out on the mattress, childish drawings, mostly done in pencil and crayon. Houses with smoke curling from chimneys. Stick figures holding hands. Always three, one tall, one small, and one in the middle. But the tallest figure had no face, just a blank oval. "I call him Maybe," Maggie said quietly, pointing to the faceless figure. "Maybe he's someone who'll find me. Maybe he won't. I don't draw a face until I know who he is." Samuel's breath caught. He looked at the small hands smoothing out the paper, at the way she tucked the scarf back in as though it were sacred. He had attended luxury galas, brokered billion-dollar deals, sat in rooms with world leaders, and never once had anything pulled him apart the way this moment did. Maggie leaned her chin into her hands. "And do you know why I wore that dress yesterday?" He shook his head slowly. "Because I thought maybe if I looked like I belonged somewhere special, someone might let me stay." He looked away, not because he didn't want to see her, but because the truth was unbearable. "I've tried praying," she said softly, almost like a confession. "But I don't think God listens anymore." He turned back, eyes meeting hers. "That's not true," he said gently. Maggie shrugged. "I figured if he's busy, maybe I need to go find my own answer. Maybe it's not about waiting." Samuel stood then, not abruptly, but with purpose. His voice was steady, but his heart was anything but. "Come with me," he said. "Not just for dinner this time." She looked at him carefully, her small face unreadable for a beat. "Why?" His throat tightened. "Because I can't unsee you, Maggie, and I don't want to forget how it feels to be seen either." She slowly closed the wooden box, tucked it under her arm, and slipped on her sneakers. They were worn down at the soles, pink laces stained with sidewalk grime. Janet appeared near the hallway, watching the exchange. Her brow lifted. Samuel approached her. "She'll be staying with me for a while. I'll cover whatever paperwork is needed." "She's not a stray puppy, Mr. Grant," Janet said, though her tone held no malice. "I know," he replied. "She's a little girl who deserves more than this." Outside, the air was colder than before. As the car pulled up, Maggie climbed in beside him and pulled her hoodie tighter. She held the box in her lap the entire ride. Samuel didn't ask questions. He didn't fill the silence. He just sat beside her, breathing in the quiet truth of what he'd seen. He had stepped into her world tonight, and what he found there would not leave him untouched. Not now. Not ever. The gates to Samuel Grant's home opened slowly, revealing a long stone driveway lined with trimmed hedges and dormant rose bushes preparing for winter. The mansion stood like a sculpture in the cold evening air, majestic, symmetrical, and utterly silent. Its windows glowed faintly golden against the dusk, but inside it felt like a museum of a life paused in motion. No laughter, no movement, no signs that anyone had lived there. Just order, space, and silence. Maggie stepped out of the car and stared up at the towering facade, her mouth slightly parted. She clutched the small wooden box to her chest as Samuel stepped out beside her. He adjusted his scarf, cleared his throat, and suddenly felt nervous. He wasn't used to guests, especially ones under 4 feet tall, carrying the weight of the world in their arms. "This is your house?" Maggie asked, almost in a whisper. He nodded. "Yes." "It looks like the buildings in the Christmas movies, the ones where people learn lessons." Samuel blinked. "I suppose it does." The front door opened with a quiet creak. Inside, the grand foyer stretched wide with marble floors, a chandelier glittering above like a frozen constellation, and 2 sweeping staircases framing the entry. But Maggie didn't look impressed. She looked wary. "It's really quiet," she said. He glanced around. "I guess I never noticed before." The echo of their footsteps followed them as he led her toward the kitchen. The staff had been dismissed for the holiday, as always. He never saw a reason to host anyone on Thanksgiving. But now, faced with a fridge full of untouched food and a little girl who hadn't eaten properly in days, the emptiness of his habits struck him square in the chest. Samuel pulled off his coat and rolled up his sleeves, awkwardly searching through drawers. "I'm not exactly skilled in the kitchen, but I can warm things up." Maggie slid onto a bar stool, watching him with curious eyes. "It's okay. I usually make cereal or toast." He turned toward her. "You won't need to do that here." Her eyes didn't flinch, but her shoulders did, just barely. A few minutes later, he placed a reheated turkey sandwich and a bowl of butternut squash soup in front of her. It wasn't gourmet, but it was warm. Real. She looked at it like it was a feast. She took a small bite, then paused and looked up. "Can I sit across from you?" He raised a brow. "Like they do in fairy tales," she added, "when someone finally belongs at the table." For a moment, Samuel forgot how to move. Then slowly, something in his chest melted again. He pulled out a chair across from her and sat down. Fairy tales it is. They ate in silence at first, but it wasn't the stiff silence of awkward company. It was something gentler, shared. Maggie didn't speak much, but when she did, her words were precise. "I never thought I'd eat in a house like this," she said between spoonfuls. Samuel leaned forward slightly. "I never thought I'd eat Thanksgiving dinner with someone brave enough to climb 42 floors to find hope." She smiled, just a little. "I didn't know how else to be found." After dinner, she followed him down the hall, clutching her wooden box, her socked feet padding softly against the hardwood floor. He showed her the guest room, but it felt sterile, too crisp, too hotel-like. So instead, he offered her the smaller den off the main hallway. It had a plush daybed, bookshelves, and warm lighting. "It's cozier," he said, awkwardly fluffing a pillow. "If that matters." "It does," she replied softly, sitting on the edge of the bed. She opened her box and carefully removed a folded piece of construction paper. Her fingers worked silently for a moment, then she turned it toward him. It was a drawing, crayon and pencil. Two figures seated at a long table, one tall with square shoulders, the other small in a red dress. Between them sat a pie, and over their heads were tiny yellow stars. "That's us," she said. Samuel knelt beside her, examining the drawing. It was clumsy, childlike, and devastating. "I usually only draw people I've known a long time," she added, "but I think it's okay to draw you now." He stared at the picture as a wave of something unnameable pressed against him. It wasn't pride. It wasn't guilt. It was something far deeper. A sense of being seen not as a man of power, but simply as a man who had said yes when no one else did. He cleared his throat. "I'm honored." "You don't have to keep it," she said quickly. "I know grown-ups don't put drawings on their walls." He looked at her sharply. "I'll keep it." She relaxed a little, then tucked the picture back into the box and lay down. Samuel pulled the blanket over her gently. "Do you want a nightlight?" he asked. "I'm used to dark." "Well," he said, rising to his feet, "you don't have to be used to that anymore." He walked toward the door, but before he could leave, Maggie's voice stopped him. "Do you think my mom would have liked you?" The question hit him square in the gut. He turned slowly. "I don't know," he admitted, "but I think she'd be proud of you." Maggie nodded, her eyes fluttering closed. "Do you think she'll ever smile again?" she whispered, half asleep. Samuel stood in the doorway, watching the small shape of her under the covers. "I hope so," he said softly. "And if she does, it'll be because of you." He left the door slightly open, the hallway light casting a soft glow across the room. Then he walked down the hall, past the lifeless portraits and echoing walls, until he reached the den where he poured himself a glass of water and sat in silence. But this silence was different. It wasn't empty. It was full of something beginning. And for the first time in his life, Samuel Grant realized he didn't want to go back to who he was before she walked in. The following mornings unfolded quietly, like the slow turning of pages in a forgotten book. The mansion, once sterile and untouched, began to stir with subtle life. Not chaos, not noise, just presence, gentle sounds. A rhythm Samuel hadn't realized he missed until it was there. Soft footsteps down the hall, the occasional giggle from the den, the squeak of a faucet not used in years, now running for 2 long bubble baths. Each morning, Samuel rose earlier than usual, not because of work, but because of Maggie. He brewed cocoa before coffee now, carefully warming milk in a small saucepan instead of relying on his automatic espresso machine. The first time he got the ratio wrong and she puckered her lips from the bitterness. He'd laughed, a short, surprised sound that echoed down the empty hallway like a secret set free. He hadn't heard himself laugh like that in years. He began leaving little notes for her in the kitchen. "Good luck drawing your space, dog," or "Don't forget mittens." In return, he started finding small, sticky notes tucked into his briefcase crayon sketches of him in a suit with huge cartoon glasses, holding a mug labeled "Not Scary Anymore." On the 3rd day, he returned home earlier than expected and found Maggie curled up in the den, a stack of picture books beside her, and one of his expensive throw blankets wrapped around her shoulders like a royal cape. She didn't jump or apologize, just looked up and said, "You missed story time." He paused, briefcase in hand, then sat down on the floor beside her, loosening his tie. "Catch me up." And so she did, reading haltingly, pointing to pictures, adding voices when she remembered. He followed every word like it was gospel. The next night, he surprised her by bringing home a storybook of his own, a worn copy of The Little Prince, pulled from the dusty shelves of his childhood box stored in the attic. She held it like treasure. They read together every night after that. One morning, as snow began to fall in lazy drifts outside the frosted windows, Samuel and Maggie decorated the tree in the sitting room. He hadn't bothered with one in years. The boxes of ornaments were still tucked away in the basement, unopened since his father's funeral. Maggie approached the process like an explorer charting new territory. She found joy in the simplest things: a glittery gold star with a broken tip, a slightly chipped ornament shaped like a bell. She insisted on hanging every single piece herself, standing on tiptoes while Samuel stood nearby with a hand out, just in case she wobbled. When she placed the final ornament and turned to him, cheeks flushed, eyes bright, he felt something shift again. Not a jolt this time, but a settling, like gravity finding its proper pull. That night, she handed him a new drawing, her best yet. It showed a cozy house with a glowing yellow window. Outside stood 3 stick figures, one with shoulder-length scribbled hair, one small with a swirl for a ponytail, and one tall with a blue tie. All of them held hands beneath a sky dotted with stars and a crescent moon. In bold letters underneath, she'd written, "Our home, someday." Samuel stared at it for a long time. "Is that me?" he asked, his voice low. She nodded solemnly. "That's the tie you wore on the first night, the blue one with the tiny squares?" He hadn't noticed she remembered. "I called it our home because maybe, if we keep choosing it, it becomes one." He folded the drawing carefully, almost reverently, and placed it inside the inner pocket of his jacket. The gesture made her smile, but it did something far more to him. It rooted him, anchored him to something real. Later that evening, Samuel found himself lingering by her doorway watching her sleep. She'd kicked off the blankets in her usual sideways sprawl, a picture book draped across her chest. Her small wooden box sat on the dresser nearby, its lid now cracked slightly open. He could see the edge of the scarf, the crayon drawings, and now a new addition. A small stone he'd given her from the garden path, smooth and gray, which she called her wish rock. He stepped inside and gently tucked the blanket over her shoulders. She stirred slightly, then murmured, "Night, Mr. Sam, not Mr. Grant. Not even Samuel. Just Sam. Simple. Whole." The next day, as snow blanketed the city, Samuel surprised her again this time by joining her in the sunroom for a board game. It was called Mouse Chase, a chaotic little thing with plastic traps and cardboard cheese tokens. He didn't understand the rules. He lost terribly, twice. But the joy in Maggie's laughter as she dramatically celebrated each win, arms flailing, face flushed, was worth more than all the quarterly bonuses in the world. He wasn't just hosting her anymore. He was participating in her life, and she in his. Every evening, the line between host and guardian blurred further. He found himself wondering what she liked for lunch, checking that her socks weren't too worn, sitting in his office longer just to listen for the sound of her humming down the hall. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't sudden, it was quiet, organic, like light filling a dark room slowly, gently pushing back the shadows. And somewhere along the way, Samuel stopped checking his phone every 15 minutes. He didn't notice missed calls or unopened emails with subject lines demanding immediate review. What he did notice was the way Maggie twirled her hair when she was thinking, how she always saved the last bite of dessert for later, but never ate it. How she whispered to the drawing in her box as though it were a secret map. He noticed her, because noticing her had become the only thing that felt truly important anymore. And in that noticing, he was becoming something else entirely. Not just a man who once ruled from glass towers, but a man who was finally coming home. The call came on a Thursday morning, barely past dawn. Samuel was in the kitchen, pouring cocoa into Maggie's favorite chipped mug, the one with faded snowflakes and the word "believe" printed on side. When Helen's voice came through his private line, tense and clipped. "There's a woman from Child Services waiting in the front foyer," she said. "She has paperwork and questions." Samuel stiffened. His hand paused mid-pour. Maggie was still asleep upstairs, curled under a blanket printed with dancing penguins. He could still hear the soft murmur of her sleepy breath over the heating vent. He walked to the front of the house with a deliberate calm, but inside, something sharp had lodged in his chest. Waiting near the grand staircase was a social worker, mid-30s, professional smile, clipboard clutched tightly against her chest. Her name tag read, "Brenda Keller, CPS. Mr. Grant," she said with an over-rehearsed tone of authority. "We've received a tip about a child currently staying on this property. A minor named Maggie Dawson?" Samuel said nothing at first, choosing instead to look at her directly long enough to make her shift her weight. "She's upstairs," he said quietly. "Sleeping. Safely." Brenda nodded. "Do you have legal guardianship?" "Not yet." Her eyes tightened. "Then I'm afraid I'll have to ask you to bring her to the office today. It's standard protocol. We need to assess living conditions, verify background, and place her in a temporary licensed facility while we sort through custody issues. Samuel's voice dropped to a low, steady pitch. You want to drag a child out of a warm bed and throw her back into the system because of a formality? Brenda straightened. Sir, I don't make the rules. I just follow them. And right now, she's not under any formal care arrangement. He didn't explode. Not exactly. But the energy in the room shifted like thunder rumbling beneath the marble floor. She's not a report number, he snapped. She's not a stray dog. She's a little girl who's finally safe, and she's not going anywhere until I know beyond a shadow of a doubt that she won't be handed back to someone who sees her as a burden. Brenda hesitated, clearly rattled. Look, I'm not trying to take her away permanently, but the process requires— I know the process, Samuel cut in. I've donated to the very systems that built it, and I've seen how easily children disappear into it. He stepped closer. She's not disappearing, not this time, not on my watch. Before Brenda could respond, soft footsteps crept down the stairs. Maggie stood on the 5th step, clutching her stuffed penguin and wearing fuzzy purple socks. Her eyes were wide. Her voice, when it came, was barely above a whisper. Are you sending me away? Samuel turned instantly. No, sweetheart. But her expression told him she'd already heard too much. I knew it, she said, a tremble in her lower lip. I knew it was too good to last. Everyone leaves. Samuel crossed the room and knelt in front of her, heart pounding. He placed both hands gently on her arms. I'm not leaving, he said. Not now. Not ever. But they'll make you, she whispered. They always do. Then let them try, he said, his voice fierce with quiet conviction. Because I'm not giving up on you. Not even for them. Tears welled in her eyes, but she didn't sob. She just buried her face into his shoulder, clutching his shirt like a lifeline. His arms wrapped around her protectively, instinctively, as if this were the only thing in the world that still made sense. Brenda watched in silence, something shifting behind her eyes. I'll note your intent, she said after a pause. But if you want to retain custody, you'll need to file for emergency guardianship. Today. Samuel nodded. The paperwork will be on your desk by noon. My legal team is already preparing it. Brenda blinked. You've already started the process? I started the moment she walked into my office, he said without flinching. She scribbled something on her clipboard and offered a tentative nod. I'll wait for confirmation from family court. As she left, Samuel stood, still holding Maggie close. She looked up at him, her eyes searching. You mean it? She asked. Even if it's hard? Even if they try to take me away? He cupped her cheek. Especially then. That afternoon, he sat with his attorneys for hours, reading every clause, initialing every line, ensuring that no loophole, no bureaucratic delay could separate them. He wasn't just filing to keep her temporarily. He was filing to fight for her permanently. That evening, as twilight deepened outside and snowflakes spiraled against the windows, Maggie sat curled in the den, drawing a new picture. This time, it was of Samuel, not in a suit, not behind a desk, but kneeling, his arms wrapped around her, like he had that morning. Above them, she'd written in bold red crayon, "Not going anywhere." He framed it, right there in the den. The next time Brenda visited, she noticed it before anything else. And for the first time, she smiled. The day the court approved Samuel's emergency guardianship, snow was falling again. Thicker this time, covering the city like a blanket that tried its best to soften the hard edges of winter. The judge's decision came swiftly. thanks in part to Samuel's legal team, who worked through the night submitting every affidavit, character letter, and background check imaginable. But it wasn't just influence or resources that had swayed the decision. It was Samuel's presence in the courtroom. He had walked in holding Maggie's hand, not a calculated gesture, but an instinctive one. And when the judge asked why a powerful man like him wanted to take on the responsibility of a child who wasn't his, he answered simply, "Because I no longer care who she was born to. I care that she's mine now." The court nodded. The gavel dropped. And just like that, the world tilted into something new. Back at the house that afternoon, Samuel stood in the center of the spare upstairs bedroom, sleeves rolled up, a paintbrush in hand. Maggie watched from the doorway, eyes wide with surprise. The walls, once a sterile cream, were now streaked with fresh color. Lavender on one side, pale yellow stars already taking shape on another. "You're painting?" she asked, blinking. "I'm trying," he said, a drip of lavender landing on his loafer. "Turns out it's harder than it looks." She giggled and walked over, barefoot on the drop cloth, taking the brush from his hand. "You missed a spot." Together, they spent the rest of the afternoon transforming the room into something alive. Samuel had ordered a bed shaped like a cottage, complete with a tiny reading nook built into the headboard. He'd spent hours personally assembling a white bookshelf and stocking it with picture books, chapter books, and a row of sketch pads with glitter pens she'd once pointed to at the bookstore window. A mobile of handmade stars and paper moons now hung above the bed, gently twirling whenever the heat vent whispered to life. He hadn't just built her a room. He'd built her a belonging. That evening, Maggie stepped into the room slowly, her socks sinking into the plush lilac rug. She turned in place, taking it all in. Her mouth opened slightly, but no words came. Then she walked to the bed and sat down, touching the blanket with her fingers. "You made this? Just for me?" Samuel nodded. "Every bit of it." She stared for a moment longer, then whispered, "I've never had anything that was mine." He knelt beside her, placing a hand gently on the bedframe. "You do now." Tears welled in her eyes, but she didn't cry. Instead, she climbed into the bed, curled beneath the covers, and looked up at him like she was afraid to believe too much. "Do you think," she asked softly, "if I stay here forever, you'll get tired of me?" His throat tightened, but he kept his voice even. "Never." She tilted her head. "Even if I leave Legos everywhere? Even if I eat the last cookie?" Samuel chuckled. "Especially then." She grinned. It was small, but it was real. He reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead. "You, Maggie Dawson, are the reason this house finally sounds like a home." From that day forward, their routines took deeper root. Samuel adjusted his work schedule permanently. No more 6 a.m. meetings, no more weekend calls that couldn't wait. He set hard boundaries with his board of directors, hired a COO to take over day-to-day operations, and made sure every calendar item had space for what mattered most now. School drop-offs, lunchbox notes, bedtime stories, dance recital rehearsals. He was still Samuel Grant, still respected, still sharp. But something had shifted. His presence in the office had become warmer. Staff whispered about how he now greeted people by name, how he carried a small crayon drawing in the pocket of his suit jacket, how he'd turned down an exclusive retreat in Aspen to attend a winter choir performance for someone important, that someone wore red tights and a crooked halo made of tinfoil and sang off-key with conviction. One snowy Saturday, Maggie invited a few classmates over for a cocoa and craft afternoon. Samuel watched from the doorway as the dining room transformed into a whirlwind of paper snowflakes, spilled glitter, and giggles. At one point, she looked over at him, her face beaming, and whispered to her friend, "That's my Sam." He didn't correct her, because that was exactly who he was now. That night, after the girls had gone home and the glitter had settled into the hardwood for eternity, Maggie brought him a new drawing. This one was a picture of their home, bright lights glowing in every window, snow falling outside, and inside, two figures sitting side by side with a book between them. Over the top, she had written, "When you find someone who stays, make sure they know their family." He looked at her, overcome. She waited, watching his reaction. He placed the drawing on the mantel, right above the fireplace, where guests would see it before they saw the fine art or antique vases. When he tucked her in that night, she looked up at him with sleepy eyes and whispered, "If this is what forever feels like, it's better than I imagined." He bent down, kissed her forehead, and replied, "Then let's keep imagining it together." And as he turned out the lights and walked down the hall, the house no longer echoed. It resonated with purpose, with belonging, with something he'd never had the words for until now. Love without condition, family without question, home without walls. 1 year later, the Grant residence looked nothing like it had on the Thanksgiving when Maggie first walked through its doors. The walls still gleamed, the chandeliers still sparkled, but now the air held something richer, something softer. Laughter echoed down the halls. The scent of cinnamon and cocoa drifted from the kitchen. Colored paper leaves, each bearing a handwritten note of gratitude, hung from strings across the living room, like bunting made of memory. Samuel stood near the fireplace, adjusting his tie. Not the usual corporate navy silk, but a warm burgundy one Maggie had picked out for him. It clashed just slightly with his shirt, but he didn't care. From the hallway came the sound of tiny feet pattering, and then Maggie appeared, her red dress swaying, her curls bouncing with every step. She wore silver shoes, a sparkly clip shaped like a star, and a glow that had nothing to do with the festive lights overhead. "Everyone's here," she said breathlessly, tugging at his hand. "We're ready." In the dining room, the long table had been transformed. No cold catering trays or untouched plates. Instead, a homemade feast had been prepared, with help from neighbors. A retired chef Samuel had befriended, and Maggie's insistence on adding mac and cheese, because that's what real holidays need. Around the table sat a group of children from the shelter ones, who, just like Maggie a year ago, had nowhere else to go. This time, someone had come looking for them. As the guests found their seats, Maggie stood at the head of the table on a small step stool Samuel had built, so she could be just tall enough to make announcements. She cleared her throat with the seriousness of a judge. "I want to thank everyone for coming," she began, voice clear, eyes shining. 1 year ago, I had no family. I thought maybe I wasn't important enough to be remembered. I brought a pie to a stranger in a big building because I thought maybe someone would see me. The room quieted. "That someone was Sam," she continued. "And he didn't just see me. He stayed." Samuel felt his throat tighten. The children stared at Maggie like she was something out of a bedtime story come to life. "This year," she said, "I don't just have a bed and a room and books. I have someone who reads stories with me, who makes pancakes badly but with heart, and who calls me his daughter, because that's what I am." She stepped down from the stool, walked to Samuel, and handed him a wrapped bundle tied in red string. "This is for you." Inside was a framed drawing her best yet, It showed the same house from the past sketches, but now there were people at every window. Smiling faces, warm light pouring out. In the center of the yard stood Samuel and Maggie holding hands, surrounded by children. Over the top, written in silver ink, were the words, "Family is the one who stays and invites others to belong." Samuel didn't speak. He couldn't. Instead, he placed the frame on the mantel beside the one from a year ago, where a lonely child had once drawn two strangers and a pie. After dinner, as snow began to fall outside, Samuel and Maggie sat on the couch, wrapped in the same blanket they'd read under all winter. The fire crackled. The children played with toys nearby, laughter filling every room of the once quiet mansion. Maggie leaned her head against his shoulder. "Do you remember the first thing I said to you?" she asked. He smiled, eyes distant for a moment. "I remember you asked to eat with me. And I said I didn't want to be invisible," she added. He nodded. "You never were." She looked up at him, small and wise in the way only children who've survived know how to be. "I'm glad I knocked on your door." Samuel's voice dropped to a whisper, choked with emotion. "You didn't just knock, sweetheart. You walked right through and rewrote everything I thought I knew." They sat in silence after that, the kind that didn't need words, just warmth and closeness and time. Later, as he tucked her into bed, she reached out and took his hand. "You'll still be here tomorrow, right?" Samuel knelt beside her, brushing hair from her cheek. "I'm not going anywhere," he said. "Not now. Not ever." She smiled, already half asleep. "That's what makes this home." He sat with her until her breathing evened, then walked back through the quiet halls, past crayon drawings, paper snowflakes, and scattered holiday crumbs. He stepped outside for a moment, into the still white night. The snow fell gently on the stone steps. The city lights shimmered in the distance. And for the first time in a long, long while, Samuel Grant felt no need to escape the stillness. Because it was no longer emptiness. It was peace. It was family. It was home. If Samuel and Maggie's journey resonated with you, and you believe in the quiet power of connection, please share this story with a loved one or anyone who might need a reminder that even in loneliness, hope can find a way in. We'd love to hear from you. What's one unexpected act of kindness you've experienced or witnessed that truly brought light into your life? Share your story with us in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next uplifting story.